Now is Lori Turnbull, political science professor at Dalhousie University. Lori, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks so much for having me today.
All right, so I want to get your thoughts on all of these politicians taking vacations during the pandemic, also the time where Canadians are being told to stay home and not to take any non-essential travel trips. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, when we first heard this earlier this week about the finance minister in Ontario traveling, that was, this big story. And people were thinking, my goodness, like how could he have possibly made this decision? But now, after a few days, it seems like the problem is more systemic in the sense that in different jurisdictions, different political parties, there are politicians who are choosing to be kind of contemptuous of the rules that they expect everybody else to follow. And so it's not any longer kind of targeted to one particular person or party. It seems to be a much broader thing. And I think it does really kind of get under the skin of people and irritate and insult people who have done the best we can to try to maintain, the rules around social distancing and not traveling and not seeing family for their holidays. And, so it's hard for people to reconcile this. I think this isn't just a story. This is going to have significant implications down the road.
Absolutely. And you mentioned it irritates and insults people. But what about the public's trust in leadership? How do you think that's going to be affected?
I mean, there's many things that affect public trust. It is something that ebbs and flows. It's not necessarily something that's, driven by a particular causal variable. It's something that can be affected by all kinds of things. And sometimes when politicians do things that affect trust in a negative way, they can build that trust back. Nothing lasts forever. But at the same time, something like this, I think, really has a significant effect on trust because people can really relate to it. So it's, sometimes politicians do things or fail to do things that we don't relate to easily in our lives as individual Canadians. But this type of thing, this is something that they did, not all of them, but some of them did this at a time they were asking us not to do this. This is a standard that seems to be applied differently. And so that type of thing can have an effect over time. And it's not just necessarily toward the politicians who are directly implicated. But something like this is an example of something that can make voters say, you know what, I'm just not interested in participating in this at all. This is ridiculous. It can affect trust in the whole system, not just individuals.
Absolutely. And Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, a number of his staffers went on vacation. What do you make of his reaction?
Yeah, I mean, very different from Premier Ford. Basically, he's saying, look, he's kind of trying to take some responsibility himself and saying, listen, poor communication, but I'm not going to discipline anyone. I can understand it's from his perspective when he's seeing a number of people, it's one thing for Premier Ford to say, okay, this minister is not going to be part of cabinet anymore. Jason Kenney is looking at a number of people who have traveled, in his jurisdiction. And so what does he do? Fire them all? It's hard to know exactly how to handle that. But I don't think that the current message from him is going to be enough. I mean, you can see a lot of people inside and outside Alberta saying, come on, I think we kind of expect a little better than this.
Absolutely. Do you think anything can be done to regain the trust of Canadians after this whole situation?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that it's going to change right now. People are frustrated, and I think this is something, again, that resonates with people, and they will hold this as an indicator not only of politicians' judgment, but their ethics to a certain extent. But I think there are things that are not necessarily directly related to this that could help to build trust. So, for instance, trying to ramp up our rollout of the vaccine might be able to help people say, okay, kind of focus on something else, and would see that as an indication that politicians are in fact extremely dedicated to fixing COVID-19 as a public health crisis.
And you mentioned the rollout of the vaccine, but Canada is also facing criticism for the very slow pace of the rollout of the vaccine. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's it. And I mean, I think, these two things don't exist in isolation. It's all the while that people are seeing these stories of politicians traveling. It's sort of at the same time as we're waiting for this vaccine rollout to be ramped up, and it's not. And compared to other countries, we're not performing well. And some of that is because of the complexities around the 2 doses and the storage and the fact that every province is kind of its own healthcare system. And so there's going to be a certain amount of kind of lack of central control over that. And that could have an implication in terms of the rollout overall. But at the same time, I think people, it's 2021. 2021 is supposed to be the year of the vaccine. People need to know that, if this stuff is available and this is something that is, this is going to bring this mess to an end, we need to have this thing in people's arms now.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that.